talk about a project that's been at the core of my work for the last 5 years, and we celebrate its entering the space of Greece today. I want to begin with a story. It comes from the 1920s in the United States, when an epidemic swept across the United States, an epidemic of encephalitis. This was a disease that, at least in some people, produced a catatonic response. They were alive, but they were not awake. They lived in this state, this purgatory of existence. Then in 1969, a drug was discovered, L-Dopa, which had the effect of unlocking them, letting them awake, come awake and alive once again. And everyone celebrated the extraordinary joy of these people who had lived for 40 years locked, becoming unlocked. But then it turned out that this drug worked just for a time. And after a very short time, a month in some cases, these people were re-locked back into this state, this catatonic state of existence. Now, I know this story not because I know any history. I'm a lawyer. I don't know anything about history. I know this story because I saw the movie called Awakenings, which is this story of these people who lived this extraordinary existence, being alive and being locked and being unlocked and then relocked. That's a cycle of the awakenings. Be locked, unlocked, and then relocked. That's the story and pattern. I want you to keep in your head as I talk about the pattern in the context of the internet. Now, this pattern, this awakenings, has a historical reference in many times in the United States, at least, around the time of the founding of the United States, for example. Our Constitution speaks not just of freedom of speech, but also of freedom of the press. And that's because at the time of our founding, the presses were extraordinarily cheap. In current dollars, it cost about $2,000 to produce a printing press in the United States. And that extraordinarily cheap opportunity to publish produced a pamphlet society, where people wrote political pamphlets and spread them broadly to engage in political speech. And this inexpensive opportunity to publish unlocked political speech. But then between 1790 and 1860, the cost of publication changed pretty dramatically. Again, in current dollars, they went from about $2,000 to $2.5 billion as the technology became more expensive to produce. And that increase in cost took this free speech and locked it up again. It was the cheap speech that produced the democratic revolution that the United States celebrates. It was this expensive speech that produced the Civil War. That's one example. There's another. Early 20s in the United States, radio began to take off. Initially, radio in the United States was extremely cheap. It was relatively cheap compared to publishing through printing presses. And it was accessible broadly, mainly because it was also unregulated by the government. The government didn't regulate radio, left radio broadcasters to figure out how to broadcast in coordination with each other. And then thousands of radio stations took off across the United States in political, social, religious contexts, and basically non-commercial contexts like the early internet. Radio became an opportunity for people to speak and spread ideas and political views and religious views broadly. Indeed, so important was this idea of non-commercial radio broadcasting that Herbert Hoover, one of the most conservative presidents in the history of the United States, said this about the idea of commercial radio. He said, "It is inconceivable that we should allow so great a possibility for service to be drowned in advertising chatter."